right. Modern, good, just what I need in today's day and age.
Dude, I mean, you can put down that little plastic puppy. This is where it's at, wheel guns, man.
Okay, wheel guns, I hear you on everything, but this is what I need, man. This is in the now.
This is just as effective, and you know what, man? I mean, you wouldn't even have that if it wasn't for this.
Okay, Kimosabe, teach me your ways. I want to learn.
All right, sit down a spell. Let's talk about the development of revolvers and how we got from this to this. All right, guys, real quick, before we get into the history behind the revolver development, we do want to talk about these revolvers that we have right here, the Zastava M83 357. It's got an all-steel frame construction. You guys probably have seen our unboxing video where we try to present all the different kind of options that we had available. One of the great things was the response was so great that we are actually out of all of the 6-inch barrels. We don't have any more of the stainless. But what we do have is some really cool, like, surplus, the 4-inch blued that are just phenomenal because, I mean, 357 with all steel construction is like a beast of a handgun, right?
Yeah. 357, 38 special.
Don't want to overlook the fact that you could still shoot 38 special in it. You know, it's got that 6-round capacity in the cylinder. So definitely, you know, if you were in the market for one of those other options, definitely consider giving the 4-inch blued a look because this is still going to be a workhorse for you.
Owning a piece of history right here. There you go.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Classic Firearms. I'm Matt, and with me today,
Jason. What's going on, guys?
What's up, guys? And we are going to talk to you about the history of the development of revolvers.
Yeah.
So revolvers, of course, very classic style of firearm. And, you know, I definitely think it's something that's not as appreciated by the modern firearm collector.
Right, I'd say that.
You know, it's definitely looked at as kind of more of an old school thing, but you know what? There's a lot of really cool things about firearms, about revolvers. And so we wanted to go a little bit about the development, the history behind firearm revolver development.
All right, so you're gonna school me, man, because I'm not a revolver aficionado.
Okay.
I know that, you know, they're great for up close and personal. They can handle whatever that you can within the limit end of the cylinder, right? And the simple fact of it's a vibe. It's cool. It gives me like Police Academy, Dirty Harry vibes, you know, get off my lawn type stuff. But like, you got it, brother.
All right.
Yours.
So any discussion of revolvers basically starts in 1831 when Samuel Colt created the modern revolver. Okay. Now, that's not to say that there weren't revolving cylinder designs amongst firearms before that, but basically one of the main differences that I look at is that these were all things that were kind of manually indexed. In other words, when you were turning that cylinder, you had to do it by hand and you're doing your best to line up that cylinder with the barrel.
Okay.
A great example of that is the pucket gun. So the pucket gun's this really interesting design from like the 1780s, and he developed it was kind of like an emplacement. It had a tripod, and it shot 2 types of bullets. It shot round, regular kind of designed bullets, as well as square projectiles. And you might ask yourself, why was this? So this guy actually had an idea that the rounded bullets were more like humane, and that the square bullets would cause more pain. So the rounded bullets were when they fought other Christian European nations, and the square bullets were for fighting against Turks and other non-Christians.
Wow.
Really weird kind of a vibe there, but it's a great example of an earlier design that does use a rotating cylinder in order to load the firearm. Even though it is a much bigger thing than we're talking about here as far as a handgun, right? But so 1831, Samuel Colt creates the revolver, and then in 1836 he has this patent on his first like really commercially successful revolver, the Colt Patterson. Now, you know, one of the things that's really interesting is that, you know, patent protections last for a specific period of time, and it defaults to kind of 10 years, but there are times you could file extensions. So when a new technology like this comes onto the field, it leaves all the other kind of companies scrambling to see what they can come up with that won't infringe on that patent, but lets them to compete, or they could choose to pay royalties if possible to kind of use the patent in their own work, right? So that's one of those things that we really kind of see over and over again. So one thing that people did was, since the cylinder on Colt's revolver, all the cylinders are in line with the barrel, you would have people who did things like make a disc where all of the cylinders pointed radially outward. But the problem with that, of course, is that means you end up with cylinders that are pointing back to you. And with these early pistols that are black powder operated, you have the problem that you could have a chain fire where the escaping hot gases and
Will
unburnt
ignite the
gunpowder
next one.
could ignite the next one.
Right.
And so you could end up with the possibility of shooting things randomly off in different directions. So we can see why that kind of a design did not gain a lot of traction,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
All right, so another thing, again, these were originally black powder designs,
Right.
and so they're kind of what we think of as like the cap and ball, right? So the way you would reload it is there would actually be a handle here, like a press, a little mini press. And so you would individually load the cylinder with black powder and a ball, and you would turn it until it was kind of facing the 6 o'clock direction. You
Okay.
could press it down, and then there'd be a nipple on the back of the cylinder where you would have to put a cap.
All right.
And part of the problem with that is that, as you are kind of moving this around, especially if you aim it up or something,
can move.
those caps could fall off. They
Right.
could get stuck back here in the action. So there is a limitation to just the design principles of that.
Okay.
But, we see development. So in 1852, Rollin White was an employee of Colt, and he presented an idea for a completely bored through cylinder. Now, an interesting thing about Colt is that Sam Colt was a brilliant inventor. He was a fantastic master salesman. He, however, was very kind of jealous of his own work. So anytime that people suggested impossible improvements, those people usually stopped working at Colt.
Oh, wow.
So Colt rejects this idea of a bored through cylinder. And so not long after that, the patent of the revolver as an idea is going to lapse. And so a couple guys named Smith and Wesson come together and they form a company. They first formed the company, the Volcanic Arms Company,
Okay.
which is interesting. It uses a little bit different of a technology for the projectiles. It uses volcanic rounds, which basically the bullet is its own case for the propellant.
Okay.
So there's nothing to eject or anything like that. It's just all kind of one self-contained unit. But they kind of divest themselves of that and form Smith and Wesson. So Rollin White goes to work for Smith and Wesson,
Right.
bringing his patent with this bored through cylinder. And so Smith and Wesson is going to produce the first revolver where there is a completely bored through cylinder.
Right.
Now your question is, of course, why is the bored through cylinder going to be an advantage when we're talking about black powder revolvers? Well, so at this time we've also developed and kind of perfected metallic cartridges.
Okay, so- okay.
A self-contained cartridge that holds the projectile and then the powder and then some way of detonating this. Now, when we talk about the ammunition used by the revolvers, most of these early kind of revolvers were going to be rim fire.
Right.
So this is true for both lever action rifles produced around this time as well as the revolvers. So you'd see things like 42 WCF, kind of Winchester, or sorry, not WCF, WRF, Winchester rim fire kind of thing. And so the rim contains a compound that is explosive, and so it is pressure sensitive. When the hammer comes in and crushes the rim, it creates a small explosion, which then sets
Ignites.
the main charge of gunpowder shooting the projectile.
Okay.
So this leads us to kind of a reversal of fortunes, right? So instead of Colt having the patent on the idea of a revolver, now Smith & Wesson has the patent on the bored through cylinder, and now it makes so much more sense. One of the main issues that firearm developers have been trying to improve throughout all development of firearms, and of course, we're already up to the kind of mid 1800s. Firearm design and development goes all the way back, to
Way back when, the Chinese.
yeah, to the Chinese.
Yeah.
We're talking, at this point, 800 years almost
Right.
of development, right? Going through different very simple designs to more and more complex designs.
Right.
And one of the biggest problems is, okay, so when you're manually loading a black powder, firearm, you're loading loose powder in one shot, and when you're talking about rifle, it's generally going to be one shot, and then you have to do it all over again.
Right.
So the revolver tackles how do you get multiple shots off, and the metallic cartridge means that we can now reload the complete cylinder
Quicker.
that much faster,
Right.
right? So you can definitely see why these advancements would give you such a huge leg up. Because if you were in the military and you're looking for a new sidearm or something, in fact, the LeMat revolver was very popular in the Confederate side, and that is a pinfire revolver that also incorporates a shotgun.
Right.
So it's a very interesting design. Pinfire, as a real quick aside, is another example of an ignition system that kind of it's interesting. So basically, every case has its own firing pin sticking out the side. So instead of coming up here and hitting the rear of the cartridge, it actually hits basically like the top of the cartridge, where it can then drive that firing pin that is part of that case in to detonate that one particular cartridge. But yeah, so the LeMat revolver was very popular as an example during the Civil War, because when everyone else is using single shot rifles, if you are close enough for a handgun to be effective, that revolver gives you so much more firepower before you have to reload it. Now, in the middle of combat, it'd be really hard to reload a black powder revolver when you're having to sit there and pour powder and put a ball in.
And all this stuff going around it. Hold on 1 second.
So that's where we kind of first get the idea behind the, I've heard it called different things, Texas Reload or Chicago Reload or whatever, where you just, that one's done, throw it off, pick up another one, right?
Okay.
So the metallic cartridge helps fix that, because your reloads are so much faster. You simply eject empty metal casings, load fresh cartridges, and you're good to go.
Okay.
So, again, at that point, Colt's now behind the 8 ball as far as they're not able to use that. So we do see a little bit of more development companies that are trying to get around this patent so that they can create a competitive thing. So there was a period in which Smith & Wesson was king of the roost, right? So that patent's protection is only going to last for a certain period of time. Right. And so during expiration of that, Colt is already busy, trying to figure out what their product's going to be. And so as soon as that's released, Colt develops and releases in 1872 the single action army, which would become the most widely spread adopted pistol. Like, that is, if there's one firearm that we think of when we think about the military at the time, the West, the everything, it's probably going to be the Colt single action army. Yep. So one of the interesting things about that is also how we have changed how things reload, because so instead of having to individually load chambers and use the press, once we have metallic cartridges, we can have to figure out a way to get those cartridges in, right? So Smith & Wesson released the Schofield, which is a top break. You actually flip a switch that's basically your rear sight, and the front half of the firearm tilts down. You get access to the full back of the cylinder. The single action army would be a great example of what we call a loading gate. So on the side of the revolver, there is a gate that can be folded down, and then you can eject and feed rounds in the back. It was another Colt invention, but it wasn't until a little bit later, about 1887, that Colt develops the swing out cylinder, which is where we use the crane arm, so that you can actually just pop that cylinder out to the side, and you're able to access all of the rear of the cylinder that way without having to weaken the frame by putting a joint there, right?
And look at that. Like, necessity is the mother of all inventions, but competition breeds
innovation. That's absolutely true.
That's awesome.
So, by this point, we're getting to be pretty modern, right? So, we've got metallic cartridges, we've got a swing out cylinder on a crane arm. We're really reaching what could be considered to be a modern design firearm. We wanted to have these examples obviously out here just for visuals, but also to kind of show you guys some of the differences. One difference that is actually a very recent kind of change is here you can see the old school where there is a firing pin directly attached to the hammer.
Okay.
And at least in this case, it is a separate piece held in place by a pin.
Right.
Originally, that would have just been molded as one piece.
Right.
But the firing pin here is kind of removable in case there's damage to it or something. But it's still mounted on the hammer, which is something that basically in kind of the 90s, so as recently as the 90s, that's gone away in favor of something like this, where there's just a flat face to the hammer.
Traditional.
And there is a frame kind of enclosed firing pin where there's a transfer of energy from the hammer to that firing pin inside the frame.
Okay.
Couple things, that actually definitely strengthens things, where instead of having any kind of an exposed protrusion that can be damaged in all sorts of ways, it's now safely ensconced in here. And if there were damage, that's now a separate piece in here that can be easily replaced.
All right, so hold on, wait a second. I get this one. Let's take a stronger look at that one, because I'm trying to get the gist of it.
So you can see that the firing pin is here mounted on the hammer, but you can see that there's a roll pin here.
Okay.
And so this is a separate piece from the rest of the hammer.
Okay.
Which does allow you to replace it much easier. Instead of having to replace the whole hammer, like originally you would have
replace the pin.
Yeah, you can just take the pin out, replace just that firing pin, and then reinstall the pin.
Okay.
So there's, and again, that's as recent as the 90s that we still see that kind of innovation. In fact, if we want to talk about real innovation, modern style revolvers, here we have a Chopper Rhino, and there's all kind of things that make this different. So first off, you can see that the bore axis is way down here. It's actually aligned with the bottom of the cylinder instead of the top of the cylinder. And so the idea is to kind of keep that bore access really low on your hand so that the recoil is coming back more directly in your arm and reduce that kind of that tendency to flip, right? Also, even though this looks like it has a hammer, this is actually a cocking piece. So if we cock that, it does do everything that it would normally do. It rotates the cylinder, it aligns that cylinder with the barrel, and the action inside here is cocked. But this is no longer attached to anything. So, in fact, we can still use this to uncock the pistol.
Ride it slowly.
Ride it slowly down. It has a loaded, or I should say, a cocking indicator, so you know whether the pistol is cocked or not cocked. Even the little lever here to release the cylinder is completely different from the mechanisms you would see on some of these older revolvers. So, even with a technology that's as old as the Revolver as a platform is, there are still companies out there that's really trying to push the envelope and making a truly modern revolver. From a tactical standpoint, I know you're a kind of tactical guy, right? There are certain advantages to a revolver over semi-auto. One of the big ones.
I think Clint Smith said it, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Put it into a body and it's going off. Mind the overspray because there will be a little splash, but yeah.
When you talk about like standoff or like danger close, like right on you, you can put this directly up against something and use it to stand off an opponent or something like that, because it's not going to get pushed out of battery.
Right, and that's
disabling your own fire.
Right, and like they call it the foxhole gun. It was a revolver that they used to go in foxholes in Vietnam and actually go through because it was the only gun that'd be guaranteed to work, right?
Yeah. So. Obviously, also like there's a kind of simplicity to a revolver where let's say you have a misfire or something. The firearm does not go off. With a semi-auto, you'd have to like manually cycle a slide or something. You just on a double action revolver, you just pull the trigger again. You're going to advance to the next cylinder, and you'll have another chance to go.
Right. Okay.
So certainly, again, we can go from pretty old school to pretty modern. Right. Now, recently, we've gotten in some really interesting revolvers here at the warehouse.
Yeah.
We've seen a kind of a little bit of an influx of the Colt Python, so it's been really cool. These are super high quality piece of equipment, and we've been blessed to see these Zastava M83 revolvers. Yeah. These things are really cool, and one of the things I think that people kind of maybe don't give them enough credit for is the fact that this is a modern revolver. So you hear that it's a Zastava Serbian-made revolver. It's from the 80s into the 90s, and you think, well, it's old school, right? But you can see here that there is no firing pin mounted on this. It's got the internal firing pin. It's got the swing arm for the cylinder. It's chambered in 357/38 special, all steel construction. So this is actually like a really modern school firearm. The sights on some of these, which they do vary from one to another, are pretty simplistic. But again, that is definitely not something that I would hold against this revolver as being a really cool kind of surplus piece, police and military use over there in, well, at the time it was Yugoslavia, but it's Serbia now. So I definitely think that these are a really cool thing for your collection and way more affordable than something like the Colt Python, despite the fact that that is such a top-notch piece.
Right. I mean, this one's like north of like what? A couple grand?
I mean, I don't want to talk pricing necessarily on the video, but I'm just saying that there's a significant price disparity, and this thing could be a workhorse if you're looking for something home defense, or you want to go out there and expand your market out into the revolver field. I think that these things are super cool.
And you get to buy a piece of history, so that's pretty cool.
That's right. That's right. Or like again, I've always got a kick out of the rhinos whenever I've seen them. They come in sometimes in like candy color flavors and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so that's just a brief kind of run through of some of the development behind the big developments in the revolver industry design. And what do you think?
I mean, that's fine. You said big developments.
Oh,
so I mean,
well, so sometimes things are a little bit special too.
Okay,
a little bit special.
All right. Well, I dig it. Good deal.
All right, well, guys, that's our walk through the development of the Revolver as a platform. Let us know, do you think there was some specific important step that we left out? Again, I think we talked about different types of ammo, like ignition systems, the way the cylinders have changed to load or unload the Revolver, and some of the big company names that you'll hear that were responsible for some of these big changes. But if there's something you think we missed, definitely, why don't you leave it down in the comment section below. And again, I really like doing these kind of walk-through histories and talking about...
I learned some.
Talking about the branching development of how things came to be the way they are today. I think that one thing that's always important to keep in mind is that something that seems so obvious now wasn't obvious
Correct.
100 years ago when it was a new idea.
I mean, think about the square projectile, man. I didn't know that. That's nuts.
That
You
is
hate somebody,
so
put a
nuts.
square in it.
But yeah,